Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining. Thank you to the people who sent in questions. And of course, a very big thank you to Miriam Friedman for organizing, keeping me on task, suggesting this topic, which and poor Miriam has to deal with recommending 10 wonderful topics, and I somehow find problems with 9 of them, but she keeps on trying, and I think this was a good topic. And so thank you very much. Thank you. Um, Okay, so there were some really good questions sent in. As we normally do it, we're going to focus on the questions that were submitted first. God willing, once I get through all of those, people will have an opportunity to follow up on the things we discussed, and if there's other things that occurs to them. Um, Let me kind of explain / apologize ahead of time. There's a lot of intricacies in the conceptual backdrop of aspects of halachos of Yom Tov. So on the one hand, I don't want to just answer things in one sentence. On the other hand, if I give you all of the backdrop, I definitely will go past my time limit and probably go past your patience limit as well. So I'll kind of try to do hopefully a happy medium. Okay. First question, and this is a question that so many people ask in different ways. May one change the temperature on a Shabbos oven? So let me just start with a basic explanation of the issue here. First of all, there's a wonderful version of an appliance. Many of you have heard of it, of course. It's called the Shabbos oven. It's something the Starkey has worked out with major companies. But I just need to emphasize, and the Starkey would say the exact same thing. Shabbos oven is a slightly misleading term because Shabbos oven makes it sound like, oh, you can use it on Shabbos. It's really not what this unique aspect is. It's really about Yom Tov. So maybe we should have titled this, why is a Shabbos oven only okay for Yom Tov? Difference between Yom Tov and Shabbos. Maybe that's how we should do it. Let me explain, broadly speaking, how this works, and this will be a little bit of an entryway into at least one other question, and that is that let's talk about the basic halachos of cooking on Yom Tov. The Torah tells me I'm allowed to do work to cook on Yom Tov. I'm allowed to do malacha that's normally prohibited on Shabbos for the sake of cooking on Yom Tov. Now, by the way, when we say that, we mean for cooking for Jews for this day of Yom Tov. That's what we mean. Okay. If I have a fire burning, am I allowed to take raw food and put it over the fire and cook it in that way? So on Shabbos, absolutely not. On Yom Tov, for sure. That's the allowance of cooking on Yom Tov. Okay, great. Next question. Am I allowed to light a fire on Yom Tov? Am I allowed to light a fire on Yom Tov to cook with? The answer is no. Even though the Torah allows me to cook on Yom Tov, I'm not allowed to light a fire on Yom Tov. The reason I'm not allowed to light a fire on Yom Tov is a rabbinic prohibition, something called molid. Molid is I'm creating a new flame. And even on Yom Tov, that's problematic. So as so many of you know, in so many different contexts, what I am allowed to do is I'm allowed to light a fire from an existing flame, right? So many of us do that in different ways. And so a person has a fire in one place and they want to bring the fire to their grill, that's okay. And so on and so forth. Okay, so I'm allowed to cook on Yom Tov, but I'm not allowed to create a new flame on Yom Tov. So if I have a gas burner, or let's say I have a gas burner and there's like an electric turn on a lot of times with the gas burners, but let's say it's already on and the flame is already on, and I want to raise the flame of my gas burner on Yom Tov for the sake of cooking, I'm allowed to, but I'm not allowed to create a new flame on my gas burner on Yom Tov. That would be a problem. The general approach, and I know this was not, let's say, the popular halachic approach decades ago, but the very mainstream halachic approach today is that electric ovens and burners, to raise the setting on an electric oven or burner, is quite possibly creating a new electric current. In other words, that it's not like there's constantly an electric current running to the burner, and now I raise it, so now it's just a bigger electric current. What most likely is happening when I raise the heat setting on a burner or an oven, electric burner or oven, is that the current will come at a greater frequency. And so essentially the current wasn't going, and now I raised it, and now the current is going. That's considered a problem of molid. So even though I'm allowed to cook on Yom Tov, there's a problem in raising the setting on an electric burner or oven on Yom Tov. Then that's the basic backdrop. The Star Cake came along with a very interesting concept, and there's a difference in Halachic authorities' opinions about this. But Rav Heinemann, of course, is someone who could certainly be relied on. And Rav Heinemann is of the opinion that it's all right to create a situation of grama for cooking on Yom Tov. And what grama is to create an indirect effect. So I press a button on my Shabbos mode oven, and that button is asking the oven to raise temperature. So it's not going to raise the temperature right away. There's going to be a delay between the time that I press that button and the temperature rises. And that's why Rav Heinemann says in those cases, it would be acceptable to raise the temperature on Yom Tov on what's called a Shabbos oven. Basically, what it's doing is it's saying that anything I'd be allowed to do if it wasn't electric, let's say it was gas, I should be allowed to do in this indirect effect mode. That's how the Shabbos oven works. Just to state the obvious, if Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, it's not okay. It's only if it's a Yom Tov weekday. Not everyone agrees to this, but his opinion is that that would be all right. So I hope that was a basic answer. Now, I want to be clear, even if somebody has a Shabbos oven, there is a problem with lowering the temperature on the oven. The reason there's a problem with lowering the temperature on the oven, and this would be true with a gas-based appliance as well, because that's not doing anything to cook. So you'd be allowed to raise the temperature on an oven for the sake of increasing the temperature to cook with it, but you wouldn't be allowed to lower it. The time that you would be allowed to lower it is if it's not going to be good for the food if it stays at that high setting. So in other words, I want to keep the food warm or keep on cooking it, but if I keep it on this high setting, it's gonna be bad for the food. It's going to be detrimental for the food. In that case, I'm allowed to lower the temperature if it's a Shabbos mode oven. But if I want to lower the temperature because I don't want it to be so hot in the house, or I just don't want to, I don't want to spend so much money on energy or whatever it is, that would not be an acceptable context in which to lower the temperature. Okay. So that's the basic story with the Shabbos mode oven. So now someone posed what really is a related question. What's the story for, let's say, adjusting the time that something is supposed to go on? So imagine the following scenario. Let's say a person, we always are trying to figure out how to make things work with our different appliances on Shabbos and certainly over Yom Tov, or imagine a 3-day Yom Tov, whatever it is. Let's say a person decided that they want to use a hot plate to warm things in their home over Yom Tov. Okay? They don't want their hot plate on all the time. So now they have an idea. They're gonna set their hot plate on a timer. The hot plate is gonna go, and by the way, and the reason why they're setting it on a timer is just so it doesn't get so hot in the kitchen. Okay, so the hot plate is gonna go on at it's gonna stay on from 10 in the morning until noon, whatever, something like that. Okay, very good. That was their plan. They realize Yom Tov morning, they take a look at the timer, and by the way, the hot plate is already in the on position, and it's just attached to the timer. And the timer, they thought the timer was set to go on at 10 in the morning, and they realized that they messed up, which seems to be a minhag Yisrael to mess up timers. And they realized they messed up, and Rabbi Branders, I'll just tell you an Amatorah aside for a second. I don't know how many times, if it ever happened to you, can't tell how many times I messed up the timers on the Amatorah sanctuary and whatever. Okay, and the lights didn't go on or did go on. They told me there was a great assistant rabbi position in Silver Spring that I should check out. So in any event, um, I thought the timer was supposed to go on at 10, and I see the timer's supposed to go on at 11:30. It's not even going to help me if the timer goes on at 11:30. Question: am I allowed to adjust the timer so that it comes on earlier? Not turn on the hot plate. The hot plate is already on. I mean, it's already set to be on. Just adjust the timer. That's all. Now, normally on Shabbos, it's a more complicated discussion that we don't really have the time for here. But normally on Shabbos, the answer to that question will be no. In other words, to do something which will make something come on sooner, normally one couldn't do. What about on Yom Tov? What about on Yom Tov? And when you think about it, it actually is very similar to the Shabbos mode oven question, to be honest with you. Right? So when you think about it, what the person is doing something that will indirectly create a context in which the hot plate will go on earlier. So I think it's pretty clear. I think many poskim would say that should not be my plan A situation, or I really shouldn't be planning to go back and forth with my timer over the course of Yom Tov. But let's say there was a situation where I realized Yom Tov morning that it was messed up, and I wanted to adjust it so it will come on earlier, and my whole food serving plan is going to have to be altered and complicated. So it probably would make sense in the context of what we were talking about with the grandma a moment ago. Again, we're talking about Yom Tov, but not on Shabbos. Probably would make sense to set the timer earlier. Ironically, it would make more sense to set the timer earlier, to turn on earlier than to turn off earlier. To turn off earlier, I'm not doing anything for food purposes. So that's just an interesting thing to think about. Okay, what's the story with the grill on Yom Tov? Can someone do a barbecue on Yom Tov? So first of all, let's assume that we're talking about a grill that you're not doing anything that's setting it electrically. You're not having to manipulate it electrically in any way. There's some grills that are electric based versus gas based. But let's say that let's say it was a gas grill, and let's say I was going to light it from an existing flame. If it's a gas grill, then I'm going to light from an existing flame, and whatever that canister of gas that's hooked up to it ahead of time, has already been hooked up to it from before Yom Tov. So then that certainly would be okay. I'm lighting the grill from an existing flame. On Yom Tov, I'm certainly allowed to put food on the grill. I could add if I wanted to add to the flame or add or bring more gas or whatever it is, I could do that as well. The one thing that is very important for people to understand, and it should make sense in light of what we've been talking about, is I'm not allowed to lower the flame on the oven. On the grill, and I'm certainly not allowed to put out the flame on the grill. In other words, I just have to let it go out on its own, because to put out the flame is not to do anything for cooking purposes. Again, unless it was such a high heat level that it was bad for the food. So what happens is if I've got a big thing of gas and I start a new thing right before Yom Tov and I got a big thing of gas, I'm probably not going to have a big thing of gas anymore once Yom Tov is over, because I have to just let it go out. I can't actively put it out. So it probably makes sense for people to be a little bit thought out as to the amount of gas they're hooking up to the grill. But so it's definitely okay as long as it's not like a starter that requires some kind of electric spark or something. If it's just lighting from a pre-existing flame and that the gas is already hooked up to it, it should really be okay. But you just have to be cognizant that you can't put out the flame. Okay. Okay, now changing gears. What's the story with grinding salt on Yom Tov? What's the story with the grinding salt on Yom Tov? So, broadly speaking, we've already said that on Yom Tov, malachos that are normally prohibited on Shabbos, if it's for food preparation, and these are food-oriented malachos, normally, not always, but normally, I'm allowed to do the malacha on Yom Tov. But what if it's something that there's no need to do it on Yom Tov? I really could have done it before Yom Tov. Just to give you three categories. There are certain types of malachos that it's a whole different world if I do it on Yom Tov or if I do it before Yom Tov. The most classic example of that is cooking, by the way. Cooking, when I'm cooking something fresh, right? It's a very different taste than if I cook something a day before. So it's very much accepted. You could cook on Yom Tov. You could bake on Yom Tov. But what about grinding something? So there are certain things that if I grind them, they'll be no different before Yom Tov than on Yom Tov. Let's say I wanted to grind flour. To the best of my knowledge, I'm no baker, but to the best of my knowledge, wheat that was ground Erev Yom Tov would be just as useful as wheat that was ground on Yom Tov. So in that case, I'm really not supposed to grind it on Yom Tov. Really not supposed to grind it on Yom Tov. And if I wanted to grind it before Yom Tov and I just lost track of things or I lost track of time, I'm allowed to grind it on Yom Tov, but I have to do it in some abnormal manner. Okay? That's one extreme, that there's really no good reason in general to do it on Yom Tov. So we say I'm supposed to do it before Yom Tov, and if I didn't have time, I could do it in some abnormal manner. Maybe do it onto a towel or something, as opposed to, let's say, the bowl that I normally, grind it into. Maybe hold the grinder sideways. Some kind of shinui. Okay. Now on the other end of it, let's say there was something. This is not grinding, but this is similar to grinding, cutting things into very small pieces. So if I want to make a salad, on Shabbos, we normally say that I shouldn't cut the pieces so fine. That's a normal halacha of Shabbos. On Yom Tov, we would say it's perfectly acceptable to cut the pieces very fine because it's a malacha. It's a malacha of cutting it so finely. But we say that we understand you're cutting vegetables for a salad. The salad is going to be more pleasant if I cut it day of than if I cut it the day before. And therefore, I can cut it finely without any unique nuance. And by the way, I don't have to cut it right before the meal if I'm doing it on Yom Tov. If I'm cutting it on first day Yom Tov, it has to be for use on first day Yom Tov. But I could cut it 8:30 in the morning for a 12:30 lunch. Shabbos, that wouldn't be so simple. So Yom Tov, I can cut it finely earlier in the day for later in the day, as long as it's that halachic day. And we wouldn't say that I would have to cut it with a shinui. We wouldn't say that I would have to cut it in an abnormal manner, because it makes sense that I'm cutting it on Yom Tov, because it's going to be a much more pleasant salad if I cut it on Yom Tov versus if I cut it before Yom Tov. And then there's a field that's in between. And the field that's in between is something that it would be very fine. Sorry, that wasn't a good word to use in the context of grinding. It would be very good if I ground it before Yom Tov, but it might be even better if I ground it on Yom Tov. And a good example of this would be salt, spices, things like that. In other words, there is some benefit in grinding it in the moment, but it's not like, oh my gosh, it's not going to be good if I grind it the day before. So it's something in between these two extremes. And by that, we say, I'm allowed lechatchila, I'm allowed when I'm making my plan, I'm allowed to do it on Yom Tov. I don't have to plan to do it before Yom Tov. I'm allowed to do it on Yom Tov. But when I do it on Yom Tov, I should do it with some type of shinui. So, for example, if I want to use a pepper grinder or something like that, so it would seem that the right thing to do with a pepper grinder is it's okay to do it on Yom Tov, but I should hold it sideways or something. I should do it differently than the norm. Okay, I hope that made sense. That's the basic story for the question presented was a salt grinder on Yom Tov. Okay. Next, Is one allowed to make fresh squeezed orange juice on Yom Tov? So this is a really interesting thing. Schita, which is a told of dash, which is to extract a smaller thing from within a larger thing. Schita is absolutely prohibited on Yom Tov, the same way that it is on Shabbos. It's very interesting. Even though it's Yom Tov, and even though you're doing this for food purposes, actually, halachic authorities wonder about it. Why? Why is that so? So one explanation given is that schita is very common for a person to do for a large scale, for a very large amount of things all at one time. And that was a concern the Rabbanan had with me doing things on Yom Tov, that I do things at a much larger scale and end up doing malacha on Yom Tov for use after Yom Tov, and that wouldn't be good. But the bottom line is, interestingly, even though we just spoke about grinding spices on Yom Tov, and we said it's okay as long as you do it with a shinui, not the same way for squeezing juice. Squeezing juice is not okay to do on Yom Tov. Even if you would do it with a shinui, it's not okay. That's a very interesting distinction. Okay. What kitchen utensils are muksa on Shabbos but not on Yom Tov? So this is interesting to think about in the context of what we were saying. So really, let's just try to get a little bit of a handle on it. So what we're saying is any type of grinding thing, that it's something that is better if I have it day of, if I grind the day of. Though we're saying I should do it in an abnormal way, we are saying I could use it on Yom Tov. We would not say that you could grind up pepper on Shabbos. So a pepper grinder or salt grinder would be muksa on Shabbos. Pepper grinder or salt grinder would not be muksa on Yom Tov. That's one thing. What about borer? Borer is a very interesting thing. So borer, there's all kinds of halachos about selecting and separating between desirable and not desirable on Shabbos. And I'm sure many of you know the basic halacha for that. It's okay if I'm taking the good from the bad on Shabbos. I'm doing it for immediate use, but I'm not allowed to do it with a specialized utensil, right? That's the case for Shabbos. For Yom Tov, if it's for food purposes, for Yom Tov, if it's for food purposes, so I am allowed to use a specialized utensil. So, for example, most authorities, to the best of my knowledge, would say that a vegetable peeler would not be acceptable to use on Shabbos. A vegetable peeler is fine to use on Yom Tov. I'll tell you another one. Okay, I always, there's all kinds of reasons I would benefit from having my wife with me, but one of the many, is that she would make sure I pronounce the following word correctly. Colander, did I say that right? Colander? I don't know. I'm getting some yeses, but I got at least one person who mouthed something to me. So, but you know what I'm talking about. Colander? Colander? Okay, I don't know. It must be my Midwest accent. That must be what it is. But but so there would normally be an issue. So if I had, let's say I had, I don't know, let's say I had some type of uh, a pot of something I was cooking, and there was some liquid and there was some solid in it. I want to pour it through. Can I do that on Shabbos? I can't do that on Shabbos. I definitely can't do that on Shabbos. That's a specialized vessel. Not okay. I could do that on Yom Tov, as long as it's for this day of Yom Tov. So that would be another example of something that I could use that wouldn't be muktzah. So things that are normally associated with borer, with selecting, would be allowed to be used on Yom Tov. Grinding type things, you might not be able to use it in the normal way, but they certainly wouldn't be muksa. I should clarify one thing. A type of utensil used for borer, used for separating, that's used on a large scale would actually be problematic even on Yom Tov. So that's just, I don't know how relevant that is for our kitchens, but for those of you with industrial sized kitchens, which I'm thinking of one person on this Zoom, but that might be an issue. Okay. Um, we're actually almost done. These questions will be a little bit quicker. Is one allowed to open a package of cutlery or plastic cups on Shabbos or Yom Tov? That's a good question. It's a good question year round. It's normally pretty accepted that one is allowed to open a package of food. Even on Shabbos, it's normally accepted that one may open a package of food. It would seem that if a person is opening something that's of a very substantial material, such as like a box, not a plastic bag, but like a cardboard box, then a person should open it in a way that it's not going to be able to be used in the future, because you don't want to be creating a kli. If, on the other hand, it's a plastic bag, there are definitely those that are strict about it, but many are lenient for something that's not as substantive a material not as substantive a material as, let's say, cardboard or something like that, like a plastic bag. You could open it on Shabbos on Shabbos. Um, you shouldn't be there'd be a whole question about how to appropriately open metal cans. Normally, the way that people open metal cans is they open it in a way that it won't be able to be reused. There's various ways of doing this, but the bottom line is, we would normally say that it's okay to open packages of food on Shabbos. Like I said, there might be some nuances to how to do it exactly depending on the type of material. We would say that if it's definite that words or letters will be broken, you shouldn't do it. You should not do it on Shabbos. Um, so what if it's not food? What if it's something with which I'll eat food? In other words, I made sure to buy, 10 different beverages. I have them all around my house on Shabbos. The only problem is I can't find any cups, or I can't find any disposable cups. I'm looking for disposable cups. I've got this bag of disposable cups, but it's sealed. Am I allowed to open a bag of disposable cups? Am I allowed to open a bag of plates or cutlery? So it's normally accepted that we would treat it the same way as we would treat food. Again, it shouldn't be, if it was a substantial material, it should be that I open it in a way that I won't be able to reuse it as a kli. But if it's just like a plastic thing, again, there are many people that are strict to open it before Shabbos. But if I didn't open it before Shabbos, the vast majority of opinions, to my knowledge, are lenient to allow one to open it. And that would be true even for Shabbos, not just for Yom Tov, but even for Shabbos. And it would be true not only for food, but for things involved with eating food. You know, like we said, like cutlery or cups or something like that. So in this regard, it would really be okay on Shabbos or Yom Tov. The next question is, may one rip tinfoil on Yom Tov? I believe the intent of the question is a person wants to, they just took a kugel out of the oven and they want to cover it with foil, whatever it is. So they want to go up to their box of foil and, tear off a piece. So I do not think we would say that's okay on Yom Tov. We wouldn't do it on Shabbos, and I do not believe we do it on Yom Tov either. Okay. Um, okay, so I have to confess, I'm not sure I understand this question. If the person wants to put in the chat maybe a further clarification, I'm not going to do it now, but as I go through, I'll be happy to give a look as I go through at the end. Person asks, what's the difference between clearing the table on Shabbos versus Yom Tov? I'm not exactly sure what the person is getting at. The one thing that occurs to me has to do with hachana, has to do with not preparing for after Yom Tov, but for that matter, we would say you shouldn't prepare for after Shabbos. So if I had my Yom Tov lunch and my Yom Tov lunch finished at 2 o'clock, or for that matter, my Shabbos lunch finished at 2 o'clock, and I want to clear the table, I have to ask myself, why am I clearing the table? Why exactly am I clearing the table? There can be different reasons I'm clearing the table. It could be that I'm clearing the table because the family is going to play a board game, and we want a place to play. Then, of course, it'll be fine to clear the table. That would be true on Shabbos or Yom Tov. It could be that I'm clearing the table because every time I look at that table, that's such a mess. It just makes me uncomfortable. In which case, that would also be okay to clear. Now, to be honest with you, there's probably a threshold that I don't care about anymore. In other words, it could be that the used plates and cutlery just strewn around about the table bothers me. But it could be, for example, it doesn't bother me to crumb. There's 5 breadcrumbs on the far end of the table. If I'm being honest, that doesn't really bother me. So then that I shouldn't do that. I should just put away the things that would bother me. Now, it could be that the reason I want to clear the table is so that's one less thing to do Saturday night. If that's the reason I want to clear the table, that's called hachana. That's called preparing. That would be problematic on Shabbos. Now, we're particularly sensitive to it on Yom Tov because we know there's another show coming. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the first day of Yom Tov. Everyone's coming back for more in a few hours. You ask yourself how they're going to have room for it, but they're coming regardless. So there, I'm certainly not allowed to clear the table if the reason I'm clearing the table or crumbing the table is to prepare for setting the table after Yom Tov. So it's really not a halachic difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov. It's just the issue is more prevalent on a Yom Tov afternoon than on a Shabbos afternoon. I hope I answered the question. Okay. May a person remove a stain on a tablecloth or an item of clothing on Yom Tov? And if so, how? I would not say a person could remove a stain from a tablecloth or clothing on Yom Tov. Chol Hamoed is an interesting question, but I think that's beyond the scope of this discussion. But I would not say it's okay on Yom Tov. And somebody asked about showering on Yom Tov. You get different opinions about this. I'm of the school of not to shower on Yom Tov. The one thing I'll tell you, there are definitely opinions that say it's acceptable. If it was another venue, I would say ask your local rabbi. But the one thing I would tell you, again, certainly to be candid, there are definitely authorities that say it's okay to shower on Yom Tov. But the strong cautionary note I would say to you is that if a person is following one of those authorities, there normally is nuance to that authority. In other words, it's a misnomer, that, yeah, I could just take a totally normal shower. There's a whole thing about how to do it and this and that. So we don't do it in my family. I don't advise people to do it. I'm just throwing it out there for the back of people's minds. If a person was going to pursue the opinion that one could shower in Yom Tov, it's worth it really talking to a rabbi or someone knowledgeable who is of that school and get the details, because it's more than a yes or no question. So that's just okay. These were all great questions. Thank you very much. So I want to go through what came in the chat now. Okay, so thank you very much. So a person asked, here it is. I gave this whole song and dance at the beginning about grandma. And then I said with the grill, you couldn't turn off the propane supply. So the person wants to know, well, isn't that grandma? So just to clarify, first of all, it's just for the record, I honestly don't even know what the time gap is between when a person would turn it off and when the flame would actually go out, but in order to be called grandma, would have to be a gap. But the other thing I want to clarify is, again, there's a difference of opinion about grandma, but even if you allow grandma, you're allowing grandma for something that that the result is fundamentally okay to bring about on Yom Tov. So in other words, what we were talking about with grandma is grandma in raising the temperature of the oven. So that's something that's positive in the realm of ochel nefesh, but there was this technical problem about raising the temperature. Okay, so if I raise the temperature through grandma, maybe yes, maybe no, you get different opinions. It's not within the realm of ochel nefesh to be turning off the grill. So grandma's not going to do it for me. I hope that made sense. Thank you. Whoever iPhone 2 is, thank you. I actually had in mind to give that example and it slipped out of my mind, so I appreciate it. We were giving examples of a borer-oriented utensil that I couldn't use on Shabbos, that I could use on Yom Tov. So if I'm serving a salad on Shabbos that has a certain amount, I'm serving a bean salad, a certain amount of liquid, so I'm not allowed to use a slotted spoon as a serving utensil for the salad, because the whole purpose of that slotted spoon is to let the liquid out so the person serving themselves can just have the solid That would be fine to use on Yom Tov. That's a great example. Thank you for raising it. Oh, thank you, iPhone 2. I didn't see. Sorry. Okay, thank you very much. Um, okay. I'm just thinking for a second. Can you set the timer on the drip coffee maker to make hot coffee on Yom Tov? Okay, so um, it, it, it's it's definitely it's definitely a reasonable question. It's definitely a reasonable question. Um, I could certainly hear an argument. I could certainly hear an argument that would be okay. I don't mean to be cute. It probably would depend how important coffee from the coffee maker is to you. That's in all seriousness. It's a very fair question. If it was the difference between whether one could smile at their friends and family on Yom Tov or not, it probably would be a reasonable thing. If it's not really a very significant thing for it, I remember I had mentioned that this whole thing about grandma is a question in the first place. If it's not such a game changer for a person, I I I, I think I would discourage a person. But I could see a scenario that it's night and day for a person. Um, Someone asked about the difference between medical lotions on Shabbos versus Yom Tov. I do not believe there's any difference about medical lotions on Shabbos versus Yom Tov. Of course, there could be scenarios that it's okay on either one, but I don't believe there'd be any difference, not to my knowledge. Thank you for asking that. Hmm, that's really interesting. Thank you, Rabbi Brandress. So I, I personally think, I guess, I guess I would be. Thank you for raising that. I guess if it's with a resealable strip, I would still say it's okay to open it on Shabbos, but I think I'd be wary of resealing it on Shabbos. You know what I mean? In other words, if a person opened it before Shabbos, then of course they could reseal it on Shabbos. If a person, I, I, but I think if a person didn't open it, they could open it before Shabbos. I think it would be okay even to open it before Shabbos as long as one doesn't reseal it on Shabbos. That's what I think I would say. It's an interesting. Yeah, thank you. Um, though I could hear, I think that's what I would say. Yeah, thank you. Okay, at this point, I'm happy to take any other comments. You're welcome to put it in the chat, or you're welcome to just kind of call it out.
Rabbi,
Yes.
the discussion about a salt or a pepper grinder, and I'm not so fancy. Even with using it as a shinui, wouldn't it be advisable that you only grind what you need, the
Thank
amount that
you.
you need?
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. Right. I sort of said it in other contexts, but I should have emphasized it in this context. Thank you. You're certainly only allowed to do what you're going to use for this meal. Now, if you forgive me, I really don't know much about how this works. I don't know if it's the type of thing someone does like at your plate, or like you do it for the table. It's if you're honest to goodness thinking to yourself, this is the amount that I should bring to the table for people to use, if that's the way people use it, that would be, if it's a reasonable estimate, that would be okay. But you're right, it should be that you're doing it the amount that you think you're going to use for this day and not beyond this day. Yeah, thank you. Fully agreed. Thank you very much. Any other comments about that or anything else? Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. I'll tell you, these are really intricate things. And I think the very specific questions and a wide range of things. It was, I definitely, I think, made for a more interesting discussion. Um, as always, thank God, we're trying not to repeat. And I think we're beginning to run out, not really running out, but we're getting a little bit lower on what both seem to be practical topics that hopefully are of interest to people, and yet things we haven't done before. So We're definitely all ears. You can contact me, contact Miriam if you have ideas. Yes. Thank you, Miriam. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. No, I'll look when you about that text. Sorry. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and good night to all. Be well.